good influences on me because she has gone through the whole UE experience and everything, and to see our graduates and our people to that level. And what you said has resonated in me so strongly because it's actually something I've been speaking to people for a good while. And I've always said, when I hear Caribbean people talking about one another as foreigners, and regardless of the criticism, regardless of the xenophobia, I correct them because to me it's incompatible that you can call someone that your nation is in a treaty relationship with as a foreigner. Like, I have serious issues with that. And we talk about regional integration and economic growth, and we put our own barriers against each other, our own income disparities against each other. Now, with regards to the economics of it and the interpersonal relationships, as you said, we put up false distinctions. You long for the day that your son lives in that type of region. I long in my lifetime that I could see my Grenadian grandmother, my Vincentian aunt, my Barbadian sister seamlessly, both with regards to cost, because you know I can't afford it as a UE student, and with regards to getting through immigration and everything. But to drill down on the economics of it, yes, we have our various histories and our various origins as islands, and our colonial history and very arbitrary lines, just as they did and it's not unique to us, just as they did on the Indian continent, just as they did in Africa. Very artificial borders and distinctions were drawn. But we have to remember that it's not someone's fault that, and excuse, I'm not being racial or anything, it's not someone's fault that whether indentured servants or slaves or enslaved people, that the ships your forefathers came on happened to land on Jamaica or Grenada or St. Vincent or Guyana. That's not someone's fault. And the reason, and there will always be income disparities, because Trinidad, as the last speaker and other people spoke about, was fortunate that its monocrop, or it's essentially one item of its plantation economy, fetched a high price on the world market. And it's not just because it was oil, because it could have been bananas for St. Lucia or Grenada or St. Vincent. The particular geopolitics of oil meant that for an extended period of time, it fetched a high price on the world market, and Trinidad was able to enjoy a high standard of living. If bananas had the same situation, then Grenada and Antigua, etc., would have that type of standard of living. And with regards to the immigration and the movement of people, you hear things about, oh, those Guyanese or those Grenadians, those Vincentians coming and take our jobs. There are two things to that. And it kind of is ironic that Trump is the current president of the United States, but no matter how many walls you build or false immigration restrictions you put up or all kind of deportation laws, it's a law of economics that people will always move from the low-income areas to the high-income areas. You could electrocute them, you could shoot, you could do whatever, but people drive for a higher standard of living. And the ironic thing is that we have to know the benefits of being in Trinidad and Tobago, because Trinidad and Tobago enjoys a trade surplus with the Eastern Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago enjoys a trade surplus with Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago even enjoys a trade surplus with the Dominican Republic. So we cannot have it both ways, because that trade surplus, as Dr. Roger Hossain showed, the X minus IM, contributes to the GNI of Trinidad and Tobago. So we cannot say that, buy all our crap, but we don't want your people coming here. And then the irony of it is that we talk about our own brothers and sisters who look and speak like us. To varying extents, accents vary across the region. And we don't want them taking our jobs, but we'll pay US and Canadian. And I'm not being racist, but we would import people from the first world to come and work down here. We put them in the best hotels and the best apartments in West Moorings and the Hyatt. And it's okay for them from the UK, from Australia, to work in Trinidad and Tobago and enjoy standards of living that the average Trinidadian will never see. But our Grenadian and our Guyanese brothers and sisters, we have an issue with that. In terms of market access, we talk about increasing exports, and Trinidad and Tobago is fortunate to have somewhat of a manufacturing sector. The Eastern Caribbean and your home country of Barbados have higher, whether you say it's overvalued or not, they have higher exchange rates than Trinidad and Tobago. Think about those markets, but we want to, it's not as expensive to move those goods there as opposed to Australia. Sometimes you would sooner get to Grenada than you could get to San Fernando. That's how close our islands are. But we put up these artificial restrictions and distinctions. And what I'm trying to say is that if that in itself solves a problem, because there will always be asymmetries. But if you really want, and Dr. Gonzalez also mentioned it, if you really want a stronger Trinidad and you want to control the flood and the flow and move of people, by definition, a stronger Caribbean is a stronger Trinidad, because it's more people. If Grenada is richer or Guyana is richer, that's demand for Trinidadian exports. Or and even the importation of labor, that increases competitiveness. That's sharing of skills, that's sharing of resources, that's collaboration. And those things spark innovation and dynamism in an economy. So that's all I really wanted to address from your presentation, and that's my only comment, in that if we truly want to talk about the economics, we have to get away from thinking of those people who are just don't sound like me, who don't look like me, or were born in a different island of me. Because at the end of the day, there's no ethnic test for a Barbadian or a Trinidadian. There's no genome or a phenotype that means, all right, my resources belong to me and not to the other people. The development of all of us makes all of us better and all of us wealthier at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thanks again for those two presentations. I just wanted to make one observation. I listened to the first presenter and I also listened to the last contribution. And all I would add is that clearly our leadership has failed us. It is an issue of leadership across the Caribbean. And in a similar note, I turn to Timothy, and I wonder, Timothy, if you could share with us whether yourself and Stefan has given any thought to what kind of governance arrangements, essentially stop thinking as an economist for now. What are the non-economic arrangements that are required to support your recommendation coming out of this study?
I had one question for Timothy. Thank you for all the presentations, but Timothy, I just wondered if you can expand. Can you hear me now? Yeah. If you can expand a little bit on what you thought by way of monetary policy. I thought that was a very interesting comment, that monetary policy, we can sort of utilize monetary policy, I believe, I'm hearing some undertones, a little bit more effectively than we currently do. And I wondered to what extent that can be achieved, and perhaps probably in responding to Mr. Franklin's question about the governance and how to better leverage the use of monetary policy. Now, I also heard your comments about the whole issue of devaluation. Of course, that has been a lot but going on now. But have you given consideration to some of the factors that would sort of minimize any positive impacts that can be had from devaluation? In other words, it would wipe them all away based on the current conditions. So if you've given thought to those conditions, and so I just want to hear your thoughts on those as well.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. First of all, just to kind of add to what Dr. Skeet was saying, as well as my friend here from International Relations. In response, actually, to what Mr. Franklin was saying, I think, honestly, the starting point has to be how do we view this thing as an economic situation, or is it really an issue of how we treat with people? I think once we start from the standpoint of seeing people as human beings and understanding as well, building into the cultural dynamic whereby we have kind of facilitated a culture of dependence on the government and dependence on state, and we've taken a lot of things for granted along the way. With respect to the whole governance arrangement needed to support the recommendations, I think basically what we need as a starting point is political will. to take the difficult decisions that come about with trying to ensure a more sustainable economy going forward. The fact of the matter is that we have been dependent on oil and gas, and I think it's obvious by now, it's been said a million times today and through the years. The reality, though, is it is profitable, and chances are it will continue to be profitable going forward. What we need to do is try to find a way to really build in that profitability and try to take that revenue in some way to target other sectors of the economy and try to really bring them up to par. I think that's one side of it. I think the other side of it is, as well, is that from a private sector standpoint, despite some of the complaints they may have on the government, the fact is they are heavily dependent on the government for a number of things, inclusive of Dr. Conrad would have pointed to the higher tertiary level education, even something as simple as the fuel subsidy, and the impact that has had on the manufacturing sector and its ability to be competitive across the region. And I think, honestly, what we have to do is get to a point whereby, on the one side, but generally, I think we need to find a way to foster more competitive and more innovative practices within that industry. And I think to some degree, our devaluation can do that because it forces these sectors to become a bit more competitive, especially if they know that the buffer is not there from the foreign exchange side to support the import dependency tendencies that they tend to have. Now, the argument isn't really about just devaluing. It has to be systemically done, and there are questions to be raised on how much at a time, or is it, basically we can continue to manage, but what is the extent to which we continue to manage it? How much are we willing to let it fluctuate? And those are questions the paper has not addressed, but I think they do need to be addressed going forward. With respect to the undertone, I didn't really want to have an undertone with respect to monetary policy. I'm a central bank economist, so maybe that's where it came out from. But I think to a large extent we have depended on the government as a driving force to facilitate any major macroeconomic objective that we've had. And I think to a fair extent, shouldn't it a fair extent, but I think that the central bank does have the potential to be more involved in bringing about certain economic conditions, And the factors that will minimize, that could wipe them out, well, basically the potential is there that it could be driven off based on a devaluation of the currency. But I think that the profit motive, and I think as well the fact that some of the weaker firms may fall off, may actually lead to greater productivity. It might also impact the overall culture of how we view ourselves and how we see ourselves having an impact. But I think as well it forces us to answer some questions that we've been putting off for a very long time from a development perspective.
Thank you both for your comments. Just one thing, coming back to the economics of it, thank you so much for sharing my perspective. It's good to know there's another regionalist in the room. And our problem in the Caribbean is not market access. Our problem is market penetration. We have a plethora of trade agreements that if we were maximizing on them, we would be in a better place all across this region. But hopefully going forward later in this century, we can actually maximize on the CARICOM Cuba, for instance. Start one with CARICOM Panama and be more creative, truthfully. But as a region, our problem is market penetration. Thanks.
There is another question. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Frank Howie is my name. My mind has been thinking about the complexity of the presentation. This question goes to the paper on the economic impact of energy price shocks and so on. My understanding, and I stand to be corrected, is that how the central bank operates, they would look at like the energy sector, the labor sector, the banking sector, and so on. So in light of this paper, was information gleaned, because we're speaking here about the economy in general. So I was wondering if it's from a micro perspective that you're just looking at at that energy sector or the macro linkages from the other sectors like banking and so on as to how it impacts on the overall economy. Could you shed some light on that?
Yeah, well, basically, from the matrices that were presented, I kind of ran through them quickly in the interest of time. But what you can essentially see from those systems of matrices is how the different sectors impact on the other sectors which are under investigation. So yes, that was considered. That was the point of running it as a structural bar. With respect to the bank, you mentioned the bank takes a look at, yes, we do analyze all the different sectors of the economy. It wasn't taken from a micro perspective, it was taken from a macroeconomic perspective. I do understand that there may be some things that could have been overlooked. I welcome any comments on that, that's always welcome. But for the most part, yeah, it was a macroeconomic perspective that we try to examine really and truly the policy constraints that we face as an economy in a reduced price environment, the shocks coming from the energy sector, because that has been the driving force of economic activity, whether directly through energy or as spillovers into the non-energy sector.
At the end of this session and also the end of the day, I would like to thank all the audience. And it's the last session, so thank God.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank all the panelists throughout the course of the day. We also thank the Cave Hill participants for listening in on continuing to listen on via Zoom. We didn't have any questions coming in. We also would like to thank all of the other participants who are tuned in via Zoom. And of course, we hope that you will join us all tomorrow as well as we continue. Now, I know I do apologize for running late. I just looked at the program and realized Lee had a small error in the time. It said that we were supposed to end at 4:03. And there was a time calculation problem there because it was from 2:37, really it should have gone to 3:37. So in our foresight, we anticipated that we would end the day at 4. So we are just about ending on time. So I apologize for the delays, and I thank you all for staying with us, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning, bright and early, so that we can continue. I know from the discussions, and indeed some lively discussions, and I know some of this will spill over into the dinner or wherever we convene again tomorrow as well. So thank you all again, and I'll